Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a fantasy creature tier list video. So I want to make a tier list based on my favorite fantasy creatures. So as always, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So we have the tier list set up here, and we have it going from S tier down to D tier. So the S tier is my absolute favorite. S tier is the creatures that if I could, I would either be that creature or have some kind of a bond with that creature. Like S tier is the creatures that I'm most obsessed with. All right, so that's top of the top. So A tier is going to be the powerful creatures that are significant to their own lore spheres. So the stories in which they exist, how significant they are in that sphere, based on my opinion and based on, my experience with stories that include those creatures. So, and B is getting closer to average, more base level kind of generic fantasy creature that exists in probably a lot of fantasy stories. And there's so many different versions of that type of creature. So it kind of sits in B, which is right in the middle, so that'll be average. So C tier is less than average, like less than awesome, less than incredible, not that powerful, and also very generic, kind of, very basic thing. And one that's closer to my least favorite, because D tier is going to be my least favorite creatures, the ones that I think are boring, very basic, very generic, no interesting things have been done with them so far, so they'll just kind of sit down there. So let's get started with the first one on the list. So actually, I really want to just start off and get the biases out of the way, because if you've been watching my videos for any period of time, then you probably know I'm a huge fan of werewolves, and I'm pretty much a magical wolf person creature bond kind of thing obsessive. Like anytime anybody's a actual werewolf or bonded to wolves or have wolf like characteristics, I'm automatically a fan. So it goes without saying that werewolf will 100% be the first one on the S tier. So all right, as I said, if I could be a werewolf, I would totally be a werewolf. Or like Perrin, if I could be a wolf brother and just take on some of the attributes, I totally would do that too. So, but also in the same category, though, I have to add dragons, because when I was young, I saw the movie version of Aragon, and it took me a while until I eventually read the books and stuff and found out how terrible an adaptation that was. But when I was young, it hit me right in the feels, and I really, really desperately wanted to bond a dragon. So that and stuff like A Knight's Tale, and pretty much any story that exists where there's a dragon and people like human bond with it, I've always identified with that. I like Smaug too from Lord of the Rings and stuff, from the Tolkien universe or whatever. But he's not as awesome as nice dragons, I guess. I don't know. Either way, let's keep going. So those are two of my very clear bias choices. I would love to have a dragon bond, and I would love to be a werewolf. So there we go. So let's see what we got up next. All right, so let's go ahead and just keep going. So the next one up we have on the list down here is a Trolloc. So Trollocs, I think, are pretty powerful. They're pretty interesting, but in terms of what they are, my head kind of generalized them in the same way as orcs. But I think they're a bit more powerful or a bit more interesting, I'll say, than orcs, because at the point where I am in the Wheel of Time series, I'm starting to learn a little bit more about how they were created. So I think it's a little more interesting. So they're kind of average, but I think they're a little bit above average. So I'm going to put them at a B tier. So next up is a phoenix. So I love phoenixes. My fraternity's emblem is actually a phoenix, and I've just always loved phoenix. Pretty much since the three legendary bird Pokemon became a thing, like back in the day, like the first generation of Pokemon and stuff. When I first heard about Moltres, I was obsessed. Like it was just immediately, and then I learned more about phoenixes and stuff, and it probably did influence the choice of fraternity I joined. So phoenix is not quite bias level, but definitely A tier. Great creature, great lore around it. Every time a phoenix comes into a story, it's always a big deal. It's always significant. It always has such great symbolism. So it definitely is an A tier creature. So next we have generic goblins. So goblins, I think well, I'll say generic because goblins cover a whole realm of like creatures, because the goblin creature itself has been modified and given a little bit of unique attributes and things in multiple stories. So it's definitely not average because of the variety that it has reached at this point. And goblins themselves can just be cool. And there's a little bit of like a Daniel Green reference in there, like the shovel goblin or whatever. So I can't just throw it at average because he's a cool guy. So we're gonna put that one also at B tier. So next we have Rozaks. The Rozak are the secondary magical creature that runs throughout the Aragon Inheritance Cycle series. So in the movies, though, they made the Rozak just these magic creatures that were created magically and are made of bugs and stuff. But in actuality, in the books, they're basically a naturally occurring creature in what is it called? Allegasia, and and they are basically, they're a regular creature. They're just, they eat humans and stuff, and they have beaks and they have their own language, and they're closer to Trollocs, but they weren't created in that kind of way. So I definitely will call them, I don't know, that's not very average. Definitely not A. Maybe B. I think I'm gonna put it at B for right now, because the way they exist, I think, is really interesting, and the way that they became a main focal point of the second book in the Inheritance Cycle, like, it was really interesting to me. So I kind of like them, but they are kind of generic. But based on the fact that this is a tier list of my favorites, I'm going to give it to the B tier. All right, so next up we have Color Whites from the Lightbringer saga. So in Lightbringer, if you use your particular drafting ability too much, it will basically get you to the point of going insane. And when you go insane, they become hyper obsessed with their power and their color and stuff. So they become color whites. Like, you're either a blue white or red white or anything like that. Any color that you draft, you become a white. So they're basically a magic user gone crazy. So it's really significant to the story that they're in. They're really interesting creatures, but they get dusted so easily in the story. Almost every time they come up, they just get handled like easily. So I gotta put it at average, because the strength level of them, the idea of them are really cool. Their usefulness in the story is really significant stuff, but their power level is just so, I mean, I guess in comparison to the characters we follow, their power level is so schmedium, like, because they just get dusted. Like, they really do. It's almost hilarious in some of the stories. So yeah, I'm definitely going to keep that at C tier. So next up we have the sandworms from Arrakis from Dune. So the sandworms are incredibly significant in their stories. I don't know if it's a spoiler, so I won't go into it, but they have a severe and serious ecological impact on the entire Dune existence. So they're very significant to their story. They're very interesting, and they're such a huge threat. There's no like concept of killing them or defeating them. There's like just get away. But if you're one of the Fremen, then you're a little bit more, I don't know, in kind of a unison with them a little bit. Like, because the Fremen appreciate their environment and nature and stuff more, and they understand the placement of the sandworms in terms of the natural hierarchy of the planet. So like, they appreciate them and stuff. So, but for me, they're still just they're like graboids from Tremors. They're just big worms. So I got to put them at C tier, even though they are incredibly significant to their story. So next up we have Banshees. Banshees are pretty generic, very old, Celtic monster. Well, not even monster, just a wailing spirit kind of thing. I like Banshees because I really like a lot of Celtic kind of lore, and like a lot of that lesser known European lore and stuff. The Banshee being a wailing spirit that signifies death, I like the fact that that entire concept has been modified over the years, because I think that is basically the root understanding, or the root inspiration for a Dementor from Harry Potter. Like, a Dementor plus a Grim Reaper figure, a Banshee plus a Grim Reaper figure equals a Dementor. That's kind of how I see it. So in terms of their power scale, the Banshee, in terms of what they do and stuff, I can't say that they're very powerful, and I haven't seen them be incredibly significant. They pop up as little points in stories that I've read, but they're never very significant. So I think that might actually have to be my first D tier one. Because the most interesting example of a Banshee I think I've seen was on the old TV show Charmed, when who was it? I think Piper, or no, Phoebe becomes a Banshee. Like, it was cool in that episode, but I think that's the biggest, most significant thing I can remember about Banshee. So it's got to be my least favorite. Next up we have Cthulhu. And with this one, I'm going to call it basically the entire Cthulhu mythos, including all of the elder things and all that. So I consider them all like kind of like a god pantheon. They're all tiers of each other, basically. So this one, as a horror fan, as a big horror fan, the nature of what Lovecraft, even though not a great person, all that kind of stuff, person of his time, along with a lot of weird mental stuff he had going on. But his fears and his issues and all that stuff that he had, and his racism and all that stuff, like, led to this entire, not industry, but this entire genre within the horror spectrum about elder creatures and eldritch monsters and unknowable evil and all that kind of stuff. So the significant role that that has played and influence it has played on movies and stuff that I like over the years means I have to give it more credit than just, you know, understanding the creator himself kind of thing. So Cthulhu, though, it's incredibly powerful. It's very obviously very significant. All the stories that they take place in, because every story about any of these Elder Thing monsters, it's about going crazy because of the Elder Things. So I gotta give this one probably a B tier. Yeah, because it's not up there with like my personal favorites and stuff. And like, I mean, it's kind of a personal favorite, but it's not, you know, as high as these other ones. So I wonder what else will hit the A tier, because that one maybe it'll get moved. I don't know. We'll see how it all shakes out when we get to the rest of these. So next up we have a Cyclops, classic Greek monster. I love Greek mythology. I love pretty much all cultures' mythologies. And Cyclops are really cool. Cyclopes, they're interesting. They're the children of Poseidon, and they were used really well in the Percy Jackson series. So between adapting the classic Cyclops like Noah or the Polyphemus, and like the use of Tyson, you know, giving Percy a Cyclops brother and stuff like that, I've seen it used multiple times in really interesting ways, and that's probably the most recent version. But almost every time we see Cyclopes, they are always tied to Greek stuff. So it's kind of very generic, kind of mid-level, kind of a basic monster that's almost always easy to get past. But they are really cool, and just they remind me of a lot of the old Greek myths that I like. That's hard to say when you're just talking. Like, they remind me a lot of the old Greek myths that I like. So I think I have to put that one still not, you know, right up there. So I think I'm going to give it a C. So C tier for the Cyclopes. So mermaids. Mermaids are next. So mermaids, I like mermaids a lot. When I was young, when I was 12, like probably right after my 12th birthday or so, I saw the Disney Channel original movie, The 13th Year, where this young boy finds out that his real mother is actually a mermaid, and he turns 13, he starts turning into a merman and stuff. And I was so obsessed with that, I kid you not, I was waiting until my 13th birthday. I just knew I was going to turn into a fish. Like, I was so sure. I just knew I was going to turn into a fish. I was going to, in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to jump into Lake Michigan or something like that and just be fine. Like, it's so funny the more I think about it, because, like, I was so serious. Like, when I was even younger, I thought, I was like, I'm getting my Harry Potter letter at 11. Like, this is going to happen. Like, all of this stuff, like, hyper influenced me. So, because of that, mermaids have always kind of held a, like, a little special place in my heart and stuff. I'm not, you know, a fan of them to the point where I still want to be a mer creature in this day and age, but it's still definitely up there. So I got to put it next to Phoenix. So it's definitely A tier for me. Next up, we have griffins. Griffins, similar to Cyclops, I tend to lump this in with a lot of Greek stuff. There's like griffins and chimeras and things like that. I tend to just kind of lump them in with a lot of that because that's where my exposure comes from. So in terms of griffin, it's, to me, it's a cool design creature. I really like the hybrid nature of it, but it's not significantly powerful, and it's not a significant creature in any story I've ever seen it in. So that one has to probably, part of me feels bad, but I think it does belong at D tier. I don't like dislike it, and it's not really one of my favorite, but I kind of almost feel like the level of majesty that it has, like, it's just such a majestic creature. It almost feels like it should go higher, but I think I got to leave it at D tier. So yeah, let's go ahead and move over to fairies. So for me, similar to how I feel about, so similar to my feelings toward banshees, I have the pretty much same feelings about fairies. So all the fae creatures, all the Celtic mythological creatures, like all the fays, and in my head, this also includes things like leprechauns, because they are technically fairies. And so the nature of that creature and the way it has gone through all the years and has, you know, gotten so many different varieties, because we know Spren from Stormlight Archive, they're definitely at least partially inspired by fairies. So like the variety of it and stuff, I think has given it some credence, but it's still, you know, kind of low down there. It's not one of my favorites. I can't think of any great significant use of it except for like in Guillermo del Toro movies where he made them like actual terrifying creatures like they were originally in mythology. But that's like only one example. So I think I got to put it down on the C tier. It's very generic, it's very common, and it's not very significant in pretty much anything I've seen it used in. So yeah. Okay, so the tier list so far is very evenly spread out. I kind of like it as evenly spread out. I don't feel like I'm being too, you know, holding too much weight on one side versus the other or anything. So okay, let's keep going. So unicorn, I think I got to off the bat throw that on C tier. Because like unicorn, they're unicorns. They're an interesting version of a misinterpretation of a creature that people saw way back when, and kind of how a dugong, or is that just the Pokemon, or is that an actual creature? Manatees, how manatees were mistaken for mermaids and stuff. So same kind of thing. But unicorns, I think they're cool. The most interesting idea of a unicorn that I can think of is from Harry Potter. The way their blood has like all those magical properties, and also in Charmed, there was an episode where magic wasn't working, and they were gifted a unicorn because if you shave off the unicorn horn, like shave, some, because the horn is made of pure magic, so you can like shave some of it off and have magic to power your spells or whatever. So that's pretty much the most significant use of unicorn I can think of, and that's pretty generic. But that was a good episode of Charm, and Harry Potter is awesome, so I can't put it at D, but I am definitely going to leave it as generic, so it's going to chill out on the C tier. And next we have Spren. So similar to dragons, if I could be anywhere near a Spren, I would desperately try to get a Spren bond. So that's got to go all the way up to S tier. And the Spren I obviously use is a fan art of Syl, because she's the most famous one that we have. She's really awesome, and she's the ancient daughter. She's probably, I wonder if that'll have any significance later, her being like one of the oldest Spren or anything, or if it's just a matter of, her having older memories that she'll unlock later or something. That's Stormlight thing. But Stormlight is one of my favorite series in existence, as judged by the Roshar flag or Roshar map behind me. So yeah, definitely S tier on the Spren. Next up we have the Minotaur. Again, a very generic Greek monster to me. I kind of wrap it all in with the other stuff. Similar to the Cyclopes, I think the most interesting, well, probably not even very interesting, but I think the most recent use of it, yeah, probably the most recent use of it I can think of is in Percy Jackson as well, because in the second book there's a significant, or actually no, in the first book there's a significant sequence with a Minotaur, and also the Minotaur itself shows up in a couple of other movies that I've seen recently. So they didn't really stick with me really hard, didn't become my favorite, but I always kind of like the idea of the maze and the Minotaur and just like that entire concept. So I think that's going to have to sit at the C also, though. It's pretty generic, not least favorite, kind of fun, but yeah, I think C is right. It's it's not in here, so it's gonna sit there, I guess. I don't know. The Bloody Caps. So Bloody Caps are basically goblins too. They're kind of they're from the Demon War saga by R.A. Salvatore. They're called Bloody Caps because they dip their little hats in the blood of the humans they kill, and they just like put them back on their head and stuff. They're like goblins. They're called Powries, but they're basically like goblin, gremlin type creatures, and they're so vicious. They're so crazy. Like, of all the creatures that are explored and talked about in the Demon War saga, I think the Bloody Caps are the ones that creep me out the most, because they're so tiny and vicious, and they just love the kill. Like, they're obsessed with just murdering. So it's like, they're more dangerous than even half the other creatures that are far more powerful, but they're more lackadaisical. They don't actively go look for people to kill, so they trip me out. And I just really like the use of it, the way R.A. Salvatore used them. He could have used them a lot more, but he used them as a very good, like, early on threat in the series that kept me reading it. So I definitely got to put that up there on the B tier. Not very generic. I'm kind of generic, but it hit me, it hit me where I live, so I kind of dig it a lot. So I got to give it a little higher. So next up we have the Shades from Threnody. So one of the short stories Brandon wrote, it takes place on the planet Threnody, where the it's kind of hard to explain. They are, to my knowledge, they're cognitive shadows that are basically partially in the physical realm, and there are rules that you have to follow while you're in the forest. The story is called Six of the Dust. So there is a set of rules that you have to follow in the forest. You can't kindle flame, you can't run, and you can't bleed. Yeah, so it's like blood, fire, and fast movement or whatever. It causes the shadows in this forest to come to life, and they will kill you. They are incredibly dangerous, and they're terrifying, but they're so fascinating. I think it's so interesting. I can't wait till Brandon gets to more stuff about Threnody so we can learn more about it. Like, it's really interesting. There's definitely some implications. I don't. I think it has to be at B. It's not quite up there with A. I can't really put it up there with the creatures that I like want it to be at one point, or still am mostly obsessed with. Like it's not quite up there, but it's definitely higher than average in my opinion. So next we have Todash space monsters from Stephen King's universe. So Stephen King's monsters basically all come from this place that is in between the universes in his multiverse. It's called Todash space. That is where the monster from It, Pennywise, that is where that thing comes from. All the monsters in the movie The Mist, that is where they come from. The pretty much anything that is non-human and creepy and all that stuff kind of comes from Todash space. And some of those monsters, like when I think of Todash space monsters, apart from Pennywise, I think about the creatures that we saw in The Mist, because they're very Cthulhu-like, they're very eldritch, they're unknowable, but they're really just animals of a different universe, and they just come over here and, you know, they just causing stuff because this isn't where they belong and stuff. So I really like it. It's really, it's I don't know. I just really love the way King does his stuff. So I can't really. I don't know. It has to be an A tier because I have near a huge. I don't know. I think I do still have a King bias. I have a solid King bias. That got to be what that is. Like I just love the use of Todash space and the way it can use the way he uses it in concert with his world building and allows it to like wrap everything around and makes it all related to each other. I just think it lends itself to such great headcanon, and it just makes the stories so much more interesting when even if in the story it doesn't mention that the creatures are from Todash space, if you add that little headcanon in, it brings it all together, it just makes it better. I don't know. I just like it. I just like it. All right, so let's move on. So vampires. All right, so it's funny to me, at least a little bit, because I love werewolves so much, and vampires and werewolves are so tied together, but I'm mostly ambivalent about vampires. I used to love vampires. I used to be really obsessed with vampires. When I was a kid, I saw the movie with Eddie Murphy, Vampire in Brooklyn, and became obsessed. I was a vampire or Black Dracula or Vampire in Brooklyn. I can't remember what his name was in that movie. I was basically a vampire for Halloween for like 8 years. After that, for like every single year, I was a vampire. It was nonstop, non-fail. I was a complete vampire. But I got over it later on because I got far more obsessed about being a werewolf and stuff. So I still really like vampires conceptually, but like just in terms of strength, power, speed, and all of that, I just totally love werewolves more. So I don't know if that needs to be A tier because of my previous relationships with the creature versus currently, because right now I'm like, yeah. So I guess yeah, it'll have to be at B because it's closer to very generic for me right now. Even though I am looking forward to the remake, I am looking forward to the remake of the Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire series. They're doing a TV show of it, so maybe that'll get my love for vampires to jump back up to A tier. I don't know. We'll see. All right, so next we have orcs. Orcs, I think, are really interesting because in the Tolkien universe, they're corrupted elves, and I think that's a really interesting way to make a creature that is another creature that's very benevolent and immortal and all this stuff. And then they've been so corrupted by the evil of the story that they're completely unredeemable now, and they're just monsters, and like they're essentially dead. It's almost like Starro. And Starro, get the star on your face, you're dead in that new Suicide Squad movie. So it's really interesting to me the way they like. I feel like it's a type of creature that we should have so much more sympathy for, but because the nature of that dark corruption, it seems to be completely irreversible. It's something that Tolkien never explored. So it's a tragic monster, but it's kind of generic. But because of the level of tragedy and the way it's a manipulated other kind of creature, it just kind of holds a different place in my heart a little bit. So it's kind of average, kind of generic, but I think it has a little bit of extra oomph. So I'm gonna have to give it to the B tier. And next up we have Murderal. So Murderal is from Wheel of Time. We now have an interesting visual of him thanks to the new Wheel of Time TV show trailer that we got. Murderal, I think so. When I first got through Eye of the World, like that was the thing that stuck with me. Apart from like the setup of all of it, like just when the Murderal and stuff and like all the Trollocs and stuff came in, I just was really interested because they're very different. Because I almost expected there to be like orcs or just basically very basic fantasy creatures and stuff like that. So Murderal were very different, and then the image I had in my head when like they have, because it's weird, at least to me, I think it's a little weird because they will say like their eyeless stare, which I guess is a clear implication they don't have eyes and stuff. But I never noticed that. Like in my head, I never like associated eyeless stare with having no eyes. So when I saw the actual visual for them, it blew my mind so completely because in my head they basically look like the riders from Lord of the Rings, like dark cloaks or like Dementors almost. My head just went very generic with it. So when we got to see it in the trailer, I just loved it so much, and they have like the round mouth with just all the teeth and stuff. It's so crazy, it's so vicious. It's not quite up there A tier, but I think I do got to give it to the B tier because it's so much cooler than I originally thought. And last but not least, we have the chasm fiends. So chasm fiends, I mean, as we all know, they're basically just creatures of this planet, and they're gigantic and they're monstrous because most of the planet is all evolved from crab type life or whatever, so crustaceans. And, and chasm fiends. They are kind of generic. I mean, they're generic to their world, I guess. That might not even be very accurate. But I don't know, in terms of their threat on Roshar or in the Cosmere is very minor. But as far as creating a creature, making a new creature, like, adding to the canon of fantasy creatures that we know, I do got to give Brandon a lot of credit. A gigantic crab with 14 legs and a giant crystal emerald heart. Like I just think it's so interesting. I can't even talk. I've been going for so long. My words are getting all jumbly. I just think it's really interesting, and I like it a lot. I think I am going to have to give it a higher rank. This one is a little close to a bias too, because Stormlight is my favorite book series. So I kind of got to give it higher than all the other base level stuff that I've been doing at B tier. So Chasm Fiends have to live at A tier because they're cool and Stormlight is cool. So yeah. Alright, I guess that will do it. That'll be my tier list. So let's take a look at it. So down here at D tier, down at the bottom, the least favorite, most generic, I have Banshees and Griffins. I've already gone through my reasons. And more generic, not very powerful, slightly significant to their stories, we have Color Whites, Sandworms, Cyclops, Fairies, Unicorns, and Minotaurs. Or the Minotaur, I guess. They're whatever. You know what I mean? So, and then at average, what I consider to be the pure average, like my interest in them is baseline. Well, my interest in them themselves is baseline, but their use in the stories that they're in is interesting and significant. But their power level is also mid-level. They can get wiped out fairly well with more effort than it takes to take out C tier people. But okay, we're not even going to go into that because each of these you can have multiple debates on verses. So I don't know if I want to do that. So, but these on B tier are definitely the ones that I consider to be the most average. They didn't have a gigantically significant influence on the stories they were in, but they're also really interesting creatures, and I do like them on average level of favoritism. And A tier is definitely the stuff that I really, really like. I've had a connection to it for a while, or it's a part of my current favorite stuff. So as I said, Phoenix, always obsessed with, had a whole mermaid phase thing. Love eldritch creatures. They're really interesting, great significant use and like great influence on horror. And Chasm Fiends because I love Stormlight. And S tier, the creatures that I would love to either be or have a soul bond with, which is a werewolf. If there's a werewolf on the planet and want to come bite me, please do. There's that, and I would love a dragon bond or just like have a dragon companion or anything like that. And I would love to have a Spren bond because I honestly don't even care which order. I can't remember. I did that Knights Radiant order quiz. I can't remember which order I was in, but I don't even care. Any of them want to give me a Niall bond, I'm all about it. So I'm totally here for it. So yeah, I guess we're going to wrap this up now. So let me know which creatures on here would you guys move around. Is there anything that I put up at the S tier that you think should probably be at the D tier? Let me know about that in the comments down below. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will talk to you all next time. Peace.